Barely Research Facts is a facts-based show, barely, brought to you by ArtNowThus, a media company based in India. The show is a trip down dissection lane of words. Every episode, the host, Shar, and me, Ragini, choose one word and deep dive into it. Every interesting fact we can find, we research somewhat casually and bring to you, pairing it with some good humor and a casual chat between two friends. This season, we've had a fact season with the usual great facts, some super chat, and we've also thrown in some guests to get you facts with that expert edge. We hope you've been tuning in. Alright, so welcome to the 11th episode of our second season here at BRF. Getting you right into the holiday spirit, this episode we've chosen the word holidays. And I jump right into that holiday spirit with the legend of Krampus, a horned, beastly figure from Central and Eastern Alpine folklore, scaring the poop out of misbehaving kids everywhere since time immemorial. We then widen the net and go hunting for the history of holidays, the weekend, and how the day of rest has evolved on the Indian subcontinent and for its many inhabitants over the years. That's a lot of facts, that's a lot of holiday talk. Enjoy the episode. So like I said, I'm going to jump right in with the history of holidays and how did the concept of going on holiday really come about. And that was something, the minute we started talking about this, while we are in the midst of a holiday season really, this idea of, yes, of course, there was designated periods of holiday, and I guess that kind of came about as a consequence of, just festivities and, certain religious functions and stuff like that. But how did this idea of, people taking holidays, taking time in the middle of the year whenever they wish to be able to go away on holiday kind of come about? And so I kind of went back into, there's not a lot really on that in terms of like what happened in the East, but of course there's a lot documented in terms of what happened in the West, and that's what I kind of know right now. But from what I can tell is that in the Middle Ages, the rich and the wealthy would go on pilgrimages, and that was sort of like the travel of the time. So, but you were still going for something that was a religious holiday. It wasn't really meant to be fun. It wasn't really meant to be like a break. It was you were still doing a part of your duty to society, right?
Yeah.
And then at that point of time, but so back around then, like in earlier times, people were traveling for war or work or for religious reasons. They weren't really traveling to go on and take a break. Regardless, even back then, there was this sense of, this one day of rest or the day of the one day off or the holy day, which would be the day that you would get off, which is from where we get our term holiday eventually. And it just was a day off. And if you were one of the poorer people who actually got that singular day of rest, you danced, you just made merry for that one day, and then you got back to work the next day. So similar to the concept of a Sunday now, but necessarily not as regular or not as weekly or monthly or whatever, but just like, there was this idea of like having that one holy day of rest. Slowly though, as you see like time progress around the 16th, 17th century, and you always see like the concept of holidays has kind of evolved into wealthier families and then has been co-opted by the poorer people because obviously, it's an enticing concept to like just have that period of rest to yourself. But around the 16th, 17th century, wealthier families would send, especially young men from wealthy families go on these, what was essentially like gap years now, but I mean, it is the 16th century, so I'm assuming travel and all takes a while, so you go on a gap decade or something of that point.
Yeah.
And then you so they would take a tour of Europe, they'd come back, and then it would kind of be this finishing touch to their education at the time. And slowly, I think as transport evolved, you start seeing better roads, you start seeing better forms of transport. People are able to travel more freely across like broader strips of land. So they're no longer confined by like territory because they're able to move faster. And you kind of see, and as this starts happening, you start seeing the rise because of this. Now, suddenly, if you are sick and you need to travel somewhere because, especially like, I'm talking about pre-modern medicine, where a lot of times when you were sick and ailing, one of the things that was prescribed to you was get a change of air. So now suddenly, if there is easier transport, it's easier for more people to access that. You're not going through a hard travel in order to get to this change of air, which is most like the travel is most likely going to kill you earlier than, the disease actually will. So you you move to, you're able to travel. Now, as these health resorts, these health towns sort of start gaining popularity with the wealthy, other things start coming up. So now no longer people just going there for like, oh, I need to get better. Sometimes you're just going there because you feel like a break. Very similar to what you do now. You travel to the mountains or to the beach or whatever because you just need a break and you need a change of scene. And then as these places like, these spa towns as they call them start evolving, there are other things that come up there. Coffee shops and pubs and, theaters and stuff like that. Things that, further attractions because if you're completely healthy and hale and hearty and going to these towns just to kind of enjoy the rest and relaxation, after a while of being, just whatever, taking the bath or doing whatever you had to, you will want to do other things. So it became a business opportunity. So these towns started, the first tourist towns really started coming about. But you still see holidays being something that is particularly for the wealthy. And I think that hasn't really changed right now also, while, you still see certain kinds of holidays that are meant for the wealthy. And then, certain kinds of holidays, depending on where you are in the socioeconomic strata, that, what you can afford and what you can't. But what I think really changed the game around then was that around, I think in the 1870s, some clerks and some other kinds of skilled workers started getting what was the first form of an annual holiday, which is they started getting like a week off in the year or something like that, where they would get paid holidays. So this is also, I'm assuming, if you're like really highly skilled, where you kind of had the kind of pull to be able to get someone to, like, there was a desire to keep you happy.
Yeah.
But around the same time, the Bank Holiday Act started giving workers a few paid holidays each year. By the beginning of the 19th century, you were seeing that most people were they didn't have really any other paid holidays, but they did get bank holidays. And then by the 19th century, you start seeing people, like everyone almost had a Sunday off. So, and then slowly as this concept evolved, so the Sunday, it moved to having like a Sunday off and then a Saturday afternoon off and then all a Saturday off. And, by around the early 19th century, you really see the birth of the weekend coming into place. And I think that that Bank Holidays Act of 1871 is really what led to the evolution of the weekend. And slowly, once this happened, once, regular working class people could have dedicated time off, they also could then avail of these holiday spots like the wealthy could, because they had the luxury of time to be able to travel a bit and come back. Of course, then it also meant that, therefore, holiday towns closer to cities, because most workers were working in cities because that's where work was. Those holiday towns really start becoming more and more prolific. And then as you go further and further into the countryside, you kind of see those towns being more remote and still for the wealthy, because that takes travel and time and you need the luxury of time to be able to do that. But essentially that is the beginning of the weekend and the beginning of how the concept of a holiday really started to evolve. It started to evolve with health, moving on to just people saying, oh, this is fun, we should do this more often. And then petitioning to make sure that they had enough time to be able to do that more often. Much like a struggle that is still ongoing today, where people just want more time to be able to holiday and have a good time, which I think is a very worthy cause. So yeah, that's the weekend.
Cool. So all the talk about the weekend, or well, holidays in general, made me think about how the Indian subcontinent has evolved in terms of holidays, because as we know, there's a smorgasbord of like people, languages, practices, cultures, religions, political realities. There's just so much happening that it's difficult to determine one blanket practice, first off. And then you have to go back into all these different histories of these different people to understand how things were different and how things are now standardized. So just with that as the context, there's a sampling in a thread that I found, a very interesting thread discussing exactly this. So they essentially, broke it down into the practice of rest days in Indian Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, Jewish Indians, Hindu festivals, the Muslim holidays and festivals, and all the way down to regional rest days, and then eventually the standardization of how India functions now, because now essentially we're a country, and you've got to have you've got to have some kind of standardization in a country. So starting off with Buddhism, there's a concept of uposatha in Buddhism, and it harkens back to an older practice of rest days. And all of this is very intrinsically related to the religions that were practiced by people, because, usually, like for instance, uposatha is a day of rest around the full moon time, where people would essentially follow tenets like, not conducting any business, not handling any money, staying away from untruths. So just don't lie on that day. I'm kidding. There's obviously, you lie on every day, and regardless of the day of rest. But they would essentially just drop everything. Jeff would put his axe down. Monks would put their minds to practicing, rereading religious tenets, and just essentially reflection, rest, meditation. And I suppose that's what it started off as, and that's what it would continue on to be. For instance, one of the quotes that is in this particular article is compares this practice to the earliest Hebrews. So this historian called Bruce A. Kimball, he talks about wandering in the desert where the moon so strongly stimulated the imagination of ancient peoples. The earliest Hebrews might have first declared periodic rest days of the lunar phase to be unlucky or taboo, and so recommended abstinence and quiescence in order not to incur the taboo. And if Jeff's whole family is doing it, there's no way Jeff's just going to be like, no, thank you, I'm all right. Yeah. So, for example, this appears to be, continues Kimball, the origin of Upavasatha Day of feasting for the ancient Aryans of India as well as the Uposatha Day of Buddhism. So there's a connection there, definitely, because everything is evolutionary. Everything evolves from something else. The initial Jeff probably had a good idea, but then, all his descendants essentially just built on the idea. And if it worked in practicality, then it was carried on. So Uposatha is not only a day of rest, but also in the ancient times was a fast day in some cases. So depending on, the practice of the religion, or it was essentially a day that was different from the rest, where, pun intended, where where there was a revolving door of practices that was happening for these different peoples. So now coming to this very interesting group of people in India, which is the Indian Jews. I was very fascinated by this because it's not necessarily something that I've read a lot about before I started researching this word, but apparently the largest Jewish community in India, they're called the Shanivar Tali, or translated as the Saturday oil pressers. And apparently this is because they are descendants of persecuted Jews from Galilee who were left stranded on Indian shores by a shipwreck around the 2nd century BC. So they've essentially just, practiced Judaism in isolation, carried on the traditions, that they grew up with. And, everything from observing Shabbat to kosher laws to circumcisions and keeping the Hebrew language alive. So they did all of that. And obviously they had a practice of having Saturdays as the day of rest and reflection and, just reflecting on how on the tenets of how the world was created and things like that. So what was interesting was, since the Jewish religious calendar counts days from sunset to sunset, they observe...
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, so the Shabbat actually begins in the evening of what is on the traditional calendar that we all use, a Friday. So it leads from Friday evening into Saturday. Then moving on to the Zoroastrians, they had an interesting concept of intervals that the year is divided into called Gahambars. So according to them, the world was created in 365 days at 6 unequal intervals. So just to keep things, interesting. At the end of each of these, there was a day of rest. So these intervals are called Gahambars, like I said before, and they on these occasions, the Parsis follow the custom of ancient Persians who in their time gathered together, said prayers, used it as a day of rest. And some of this custom is still followed and is practiced in Bombay, where there's, as everybody in India knows, there's a large population of Zoroastrians. Now, when it comes to Hindu festivals, there's a ton of regional diversity, as we all know, just not even in the festivals that are most important to each region, but also in the way that they're celebrated. So while I mean, honestly, I wouldn't say that I spent like a PhD research thesis level amount of time on this. But so there is talk of Saturday as a weekly holy day, and some claims that this corresponds to the traditional oil bath in parts of southern India, which could take many hours and was almost like luxurious, but was actually like probably just practicing hygiene at the time. And this is reflected in the Ashtanga yoga as well. But, I couldn't find any detail. If anybody listening has knowledge about that, just get in touch with us and let us know, because I'm super interested in this. So Thread found it important to quote Caleb Wright. Essentially, he was a traveler. He was an industrialist and a traveler who traveled to India and, wrote about it. And again, this is sort of like interesting literature from the time that's not necessarily from people who were historians, but people who were enthusiasts and made it, a big part of their life. So he said, this is around the time, in 1853, in India, the division of time into weeks has all along been observed. The remembrance, however, of the seventh day as a Sabbath or sacred day of rest has been completely lost. Now, bear in mind, this is Caleb's, opinion. But it's a nice window into what people thought of, or the layperson thought of the practices that were happening in India at the time. He continues, instead thereof, there have been substituted certain periodical anniversary days of high festival. What a nice way to describe it. High festival in honor of the principal divinities, which we all know as, Holi, Diwali, and all of these other festivals that are important to us. And I like how he ends, there's scarcely a day which is not celebrated by one or other of the leading sects. I quite like that. There's also a note from Abbe Dubois in Mysore from 1906, where he says, many religious customs are followed only by certain sects in the districts of Western Mysore that I have observed. Monday in each week kept nearly in the same way as Sunday among Christians. So again, this could just be an interesting insight into how things were slightly different for slightly different people. So coming to the Muslim population, as we all know, Friday is the day of prayers and a day of rest. And in a lot of the Islamic countries, that is a day off, but it is known universally. Now, coming to the implementation of legally having a rest day in the week. So enter the British. So since the British government was established in India, they obviously wanted to mold society to fit their, laws, their rules, their regulations, their way of life, more importantly. And in 1884, the first meeting of industrial workers in Bombay's history passed a resolution asking for a full day of rest on Sunday. So from when the East India Company was set up in India and, all the way up to the end of the 19th century, there was this, obviously they started to change to accommodate the British way of life. And in 1884, they formally made a request because they wanted to, basically. I want to end with an interview of a worker in Bombay from late 19th century who eloquently puts it and speaks of Sunday. Sunday is the best day. Quite apart from any question of religion, this holiday has been observed for many years as a day of rest. Now, we can never know how many years is, but it was clearly long enough for them to want to write it down into a legal rule. So that's the story of rest days across the Indian subcontinent. It's long and winding, and I hope you've enjoyed it.
But it eventually ends up right where we started off at on Sunday.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So given that the last segment ended on, everyone's favorite day of the week, Sunday, I'm going to come back to a holiday custom that has now slowly going to become my favorite holiday custom of the year, even though nobody this side of the country, of the world, celebrates it. I came across the wonderful legend of this fantastic creature called Krampus, or Krampus. I don't know how you say this, but I'm going to say Krampus because it sounds like a grumpus, and that's funny for me. But apparently this is something that we've seen in pop culture a fair bit. I do know that there is a Stranger Things episode that also has played on the legend of Krampus. But I'm going to just going, but I think they've kind of stylized it a bit. But going back to the roots of it, Krampus is basically a half goat, half demon, son of the Norse god of the underworld, whose role in all of folklore just seems to be to punish naughty children at Christmas time. And so punish means like, he might just give them the occasional whack. And some cases they've been really, really terrible, he drags them to hell, which means that nobody ever hears from them again. So if you're a child growing up, in Eastern Europe, and you're just like, this is just such a lovely tale to grow up on, right? Like, I mean, I don't see why anyone would ever be bad after this. But so they say he comes to on the eve of December the 5th, a night which is called, I'm going to do my best to pronounce it, but Krampus not. I'm assuming that's German, and that was my attempt at German speaking. You can usually hear him coming with the soft, like, steps of his bare human foot, and it alternates with like the tip clop of his hoof, because he's also half goat, like I mentioned. And he comes apparently armed with these like branches, so that if he does cross a naughty child on the road, he can like give them a whack. And children apparently so he's basically the not so nice counterpart to Santa, right? Like, that's clear at this point. He's supposed to have like devilish horns, like a long snake tongue. He looks like a demon, like the face of a demon. His body is covered in fur, and he's also apparently he has like a bunch of chains and all on him. He's also got like this large sack on his back that he uses to like cart evil children often. So while Santa uses his sack to like carry toys to reward good children, this one like carries his sack to like take them like back, and to basically like kidnap them, essentially. I don't know why nobody's ever used that term in this entire thing, but he basically kidnaps children who are like not nice. So if you're a child who's been like moderately bad, and you haven't like really made it to the naughty list, you might just get like a bit of a whack. If you're not, you wind up in the sack. And he comes to town the night before what is called the Feast of Saint Nicholas. And if you do happen to get taken into the sack, you don't know whether you're going to hell, whether you might get eaten as a snack, drowned in a river. The possibilities are just endless. And sometimes, there are some images that I saw of, Krampus at Christmas time, and some of them do have him like hanging with Santa. And you can see Santa's only like talking to the 1-2 children who are like, looking equally petrified. It's hilarious to watch actually, because those kids are all looking scared. This Krampus is going after one of them like with force. The parents are chill, like they're acting like nothing is going on whatsoever. But the other 2 children who Santa is talking to are petrified as well. And they're getting gifts, and like it's just bizarre. But like I don't know how. I mean, it really goes to show you like child services and like just treatment of like children in general has evolved considerably over the years. Because if anyone tried to do this now, I can imagine like what the reaction to that would be. So now the thing is, like, obviously like all of this is folklore and it's all stories and stuff like that. But it is also interesting to just see how traditions and these kind of stories just survive over long periods of time, right? But it does feel like, given just how, I want to say polarizing, but I also want to just say like how disturbing the whole story around Krampus is, especially given that its target audience is children and are using it to terrify children into good behavior. Krampus has obviously faced some pushback in terms of just being allowed to live its life as a legend. Apparently in 1923 in Austria, there was a fascist Christian social party that banned all Krampus activities. There is some doubt about what the motives were. It does feel like there was a bit of like appeasing a certain vote bank in this, but they did kind of use they did sort of make their rationale around the fact that it was terrifying to children, and this was probably like not the best thing that you should be doing to children. Clearly, it did not last too long. I don't think anyone really cared about how bad it was for young children, how badly it was influencing them. This idea of this very violent holiday intruder coming into the house in the middle of the night. But like child trauma aside, very, very quickly, the legend of Krampus was back, and people were back to all kinds of Krampus festivities. But today, if you do end up in that side of Europe around Christmas time, on the night of December 5th, you will see lots of like very elaborately dressed Santa Clauses, apparently, who are hanging out with their Krampuses. And then these guys, they go around to like houses and businesses, and so the Santa will give you gifts, and sometimes the Krampus will threaten you. But also like they're feeling particularly boisterous. The Krampus will normally go around like whacking people with these birch branches that the original Krampus is supposed to have. And if you're a passerby, you'll get a whack. And this is apparently something that the young men are very fond of doing there. And it's not like if you run into a cafe or something, you'll get spared. No, they follow you in and they whack you. So if you're in Eastern Central Europe on the night of Christmas, of December the 5th, expect to get a few whacks. So I think everyone just takes it in the spirit of festivities, because I don't see myself being this, like, I don't think I'd be very pleased if I'm on holiday somewhere and someone came like chasing me with a branch to like beat me. But apparently people do, and they're just like, it's just part of the festivity, so they just endure it. And I think then you can just go around there and buy a Krampus mask that are being sold all over. They're made from wood, and they have I think they're somewhat expensive, but they're also like a work of a lot of labor. Those masks are really pretty. We'll put a picture on the blog actually, because there's a lot of detail and you can just see the amount of work that goes into it. But yeah, but that is the legend of Krampus and all the festivities that it still inspires today. Some of which do sound, I mean, I don't know, I quite like him. And I think the festivities, if you're not participating in them, do sound like fun. And if anyone does happen to be a part of this or has been a part of this, let us know what it was like for you. I'd really be interested to hear that story.
So, with that Krampusy story, we've come to the end of the episode. We hope you've enjoyed the episode, and we do have a small favor to ask of you. So, as you know, BRF is an independent podcast. No sponsors. We love making this podcast and we want to keep doing it. So if you love us as much as we love doing this, you can consider supporting us through a small donation. We've got an InstaMojo link for anybody in India, and we've got a PayPal one for if you're outside of India. You can find these links in our Instagram bio or the show notes to the episode, which is on our website. On Instagram, we're at Barely Research Facts, and we know that not everyone is able to support monetarily. We completely understand. So you can still help us out by rating the show. You can rate the show, follow us on any of the apps that you're listening to us on, and leave a review if you're listening to us on Spotify or iTunes, because that really helps, apparently. We hope you've enjoyed the episode so far. We hope you're having a good holiday season. In summary, if you like to rewind, you'll want to listen to our next episode. Why, you ask? Because it's the best of, the champions of BRF, the League of Extraordinary Facts, and the hype machine has run out of juice. So just watch out for our next episode. We're sure you'll enjoy it. It's a good recap of everything we've covered this season. And it's the last episode. So give it a listen. It's a good one.
Aww. Okay, just a side note as well. The next episode, well, we are jumping into the holiday season, so we're going on a bit of a break as well before we release our final episode. That goes out on the 7th of Jan. If you need a reminder, follow us on Instagram. You will get reminders there of the next episode. Like we always say, you do know our parent company has a newsletter that goes out every twice a month. Well, now actually, it's called Probably Relevant. We do a bunch of feature articles. We do a bunch of super interesting facts. We have so much original and curated content out there. It's a great read. I absolutely recommend it. If you haven't already, sign up for it. You can do it on our website. We're at www.ArtNowThus.in. Or once again, just head on over to the Barely Research Facts Instagram page. Follow us there, give us some love there, and just spread the love as much as you can. This episode, once again, was edited by Mohit Chandelier. Music for the podcast is by Charita Arora. We will see you next time in a month, well, in about 3 weeks. Until then, happy holidays, and we'll see you on the other side, guys.